Thank you, Etienne. So hello, everyone. Welcome to this meetup on how to make remote PI planning a big success. First of all, I would like to thank Digital Tango for organizing this meetup. Digital Tango is a partner with RenTouch for about 3 years, and they are, well, the only partner for RenTouch in France and Canada. And yeah, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share some very special tricks on remote PI planning with you. So yeah, my name is Rafael. I'm one of the co-founders of RenTouch. RenTouch is a Swiss-based enterprise SaaS company developing tools for agile teams. And our main product is the PI planning app, which is a tool specifically designed for or to facilitate PI plannings and especially tackling the challenges of remote PI planning. Yeah, it also integrates perfectly with ALM tools like Jira, Rally, and Microsoft Azure DevOps in a bi-directional fashion. And we also support companies that want to adopt the PI planning app during the integration phase with support on configuring the connection so that your teams can just concentrate on planning and yeah, no distraction, but only clear focus on the plan and the conversations. So, but we are not here to talk about the PI planning app mainly. Today we want to explore tips and tricks on remote PI planning that you can utilize for your PI plannings. And yeah, the term remote is a hot topic, especially these days. The current situation has forced all of us to make virtual communication part of our everyday life. And today I want to explore with you things that you need to have an eye on when preparing or running a remote PI planning. Everything I share with you today, I have learned from customers over the past years. And yeah, I'm happy to share these learnings with you. So I have set up a planning session here in the PI planning app where I have all the contents I would like to walk you through. So let's start with a quick look at the agenda. So most of the time I will spend on the preparation part of PI planning, as it is crucial for a successful PI planning to get this right. Then we have a segment where we talk about run a simulation and why it's important to run a simulation prior to a PI planning. And then I would like to look into the PI planning event and go into certain scenarios of an actual PI planning event, play through certain procedures, and tell some stories of our clients as well. Now here we have our capacity allocation, but I used it to outline how I would like to spend our time today. So yeah, I want to maintain a good balance between tips and tricks, customer stories, and questions and inputs from your side. So yeah, the first thing we need to understand is that remote collaboration is a skill that we need to internalize and that we need to learn. And yeah, many people usually think, well, we will be fine. Everyone will be able to communicate as in real life, face-to-face conversations. But that's not really the case. We really need to train the teams on this new situation. And we need to learn this skill, remote planning. And we can't leave that to chance. So, as I said before, I want to facilitate today's meetup as an interactive session. I hope that you will actively participate in that experiment. To make this as interactive as possible, I have prepared this session here in the PI Planning app. So if you have Chrome or Edge browser, you can log in using these credentials here. I will zoom in a little bit, and I can also put it here in the chat. So you should see the credentials in the chat now. So you can log in going to collab.piplanning.io, use the username innovate+1@piplanning.io, and meetup@23 is the password. Please make sure that you have the uppercase M. Yeah. So while you want to log in and also try out, please don't do anything on the boards yet. We will come to that right in a second. So let's switch to the program backlog board. So here I have put together some features for today's sessions that I would like to release at the end. So I will split. Let's start with PI planning preparation, because that's the first step of a successful PI planning. And I will split PI planning preparation into 3 segments. First, working agreements, PI planning agenda, and tooling. So let's start with working agreements. I will briefly assign this to the working agreements team and also switch to their team board. So working agreements really help us to define certain norms so that the teams can work together in the most productive way possible. And it also helps to hold attendees accountable to these pre-agreed guidelines. And as a side effect, teams can, of course, also hold themselves and each other accountable. And then a very important thing is that we define these working agreements together with the teams, and we improve these working agreements iteratively. So every time we come out of a PI planning, we have a ton of feedback from surveys and retrospectives, and we want to work those inputs into our working agreements so we improve over time. And yeah, so back to our working agreements for this particular session. I hope you were able to log in. If for some reason you can't manage to log in, that's no problem. Just write your question, as Etienne said, into the Q&A tab that you find at the bottom of the Zoom window somewhere. And we will also cover your questions. So yeah, here is how you can interact. And as I said, it's an experiment. I would like if you can add sticky notes with your questions. So if you have questions, you can add a purple sticky note on the board. You can do that by clicking on the add button and then select the Q&A sticky type, which is the purple one. Then you can write down your question and yeah, place it wherever you want on the board. The other thing is, yeah, and also please apply a blue flag if possible, so that I can keep track which one I've already answered. And if you have an input or something to add or a better approach, then you can throw an orange sticky note on the board, also apply a blue flag so that I can keep track of them. And if you would like to add something, put your name on it so we can call you out and we can unmute you so you can speak up to it if you want to share something. So these are the working agreements for today's session here. As you can see, it's really important that you give the teams some time to familiarize with these working agreements. Don't just throw a bunch of working agreements their way like I did right now, but develop them together with the team so everyone can understand the why behind every working agreement on your list. So some other working agreements for your PI planning could be listen first, then talk, trigger conversations with stickers, talk first, then send dependency to another team, respect each other, unmute, speak, mute, listen, and have video channel constantly open. And video on is one of the most important things of remote PI planning, because you can only read the emotions of someone else a little better if you can also see how they are behaving, and you can also learn more from what they want to tell us. And the communication is one of the most underestimated things in PI planning, unfortunately, but it's also the most important thing that we need to get right. And here I would like to add a story from a customer from Singapore. They used Confluence to define the working agreements, and the teams wanted to bring a little fun into the working agreement, so they wrote, turn on your video camera even when you're wearing your pajamas. And their hope with this funny wording was that the participants at the day of PI planning hopefully remember to turn on the camera. And what happened was, at the day of PI planning, a team turned on their webcam and they were all sitting there wearing their pajamas. And this is quite original for a company that is in the financial sector, and usually everyone is wearing suits. So this was such a good icebreaker for the PI planning that they reported to us that they had the feeling that everyone was interacting more afterwards. And the biggest risk of remote PI planning is that teams avoid talking. And as I said before, remote is a skill. And when people are not completely familiar with something which is new, they just tend to avoid it. So be creative, make sure that you can at least lower the barrier and get everyone trained on remote communication. Yeah, and then I would like to switch to the backlog again and jump into the topic PI planning agenda. So yeah, here we go. So let's have a look at the PI planning agenda in a remote setting. We all know what an agenda is good for. Basically, everyone knows what's next in the daily schedule. Sessions are time boxed, and we have more structure to the PI planning. So yeah, it makes sense to basically pre-record the presentations and briefings, which are normally held at the beginning of a PI planning. So you can also share these videos with the participants prior to the PI planning. And remember, during the PI planning, there is already enough information that they need to process. So it makes sense if they can watch the presentations in advance and focus more of their energy on the plan during or at the day of PI planning. So yeah, let's be honest, these will still be very intense 3 or 4 days of PI planning, even though we take some of the presentation stuff out of the days where we have the team breakout sessions. Something we learned from a customer was that they recorded the presentations and briefings, but they also combined it with a quiz that they shared with the participants. And this, of course, is a brilliant method so that the participants can make sure that they have also understood the context correctly. And it's also a feedback for management if their presentation was perceived the right way. Yeah, then very important, be respectful of time zones. And when preparing an agenda, and yeah, don't put the breakout sessions in the middle of the night. Someone working in another part of the world, that can be, yeah, not really cool for some other people attending the remote session. Sometimes people also, or organizations also, manage to split the breakout sessions, and one breakout session starts earlier and then the other starts later, but then you have the problem of the communication regarding dependencies, which presents you with more challenges. So if you can at least say, we place the breakout sessions when for someone it's morning and for someone else it's not too late in the evening. That's a good approach. One feedback that we received from a UK customer was once that they used the PI planning app and they said, we were faster than ever. And I think they could only be so fast because the teams, and yeah, that's my assumption, that the teams talked less with each other. Yes, remote PI planning is more intense, and part of the reason for that is that we are not completely used to this new way of communication yet still. And as I said before, if we are not completely used to something, we tend to avoid it. I think that's what happened here. So they gave us this feedback as if it was a good thing. In my opinion, it's an alarming sign that they have lost sight of the reason why we do PI plannings. And one of the values is that we get a common understanding of our plan for the next PI. And that's just not possible if we talk less and plan faster. And yeah, for once, it's not about efficiency in PI planning. After PI planning, yes, but during PI planning, not really. And then we have extend agenda up to include more days for remote PI planning. So here we also got the feedback from a customer in the US. They extended it up to 5 days. And that sounds like a way better idea. They didn't work 5 days, 9 to 5. They just did planning every day for half a day. And this way, the participants had energy for creativity, energy to have fun, and energy to connect with video conferencing every day and work on their plan. And another feedback from a customer in Sweden was that they had the reason of extending the agenda was mainly to reduce screen time and getting energy and focus back. So that is really similar to what they from the US encountered, but they are also bringing up another good point. Reduce screen time. We underestimate how many hours we spend in front of the computer screen. For most people, that's really tiring. So keep an eye on that as well. Make sure how you can reduce the screen time, and please plan enough breaks into your agenda as well. And then, define a default time zone. It should be an easy one. Just say our time zone is East Coast US. Why? Because you don't want to have to ask the question every time, are you talking about Indian 9 a.m. or are you talking about Canada 9 a.m.? That might also be something that you want to consider to put into your working agreements, of course, but try to reduce the amount of unnecessary conversations in remote PI planning, because remote communication is hard enough and we just don't get up every morning to ask such questions. And then a last point, but I think we are all familiar, but it doesn't hurt to mention it again. Use checklists everywhere and for everything so that we know what we need to do and in which order, so we can have more capacity to think through our plans. And now the last part of preparation, especially in remote PI planning, is tooling. And let me switch to the Teams tooling. So let's be honest, without technology, you can't run a remote PI planning. That's just a fact. And yeah, no tools, no remote PI planning. Yes, collaboration tools allow basically your team to remain intellectually and visually connected to your plan, to what's going on, and everyone can keep their energy high throughout the whole day. But also try to implement as few tools as possible, um, because every tool we add adds complexity to the planning process, which distracts from the actual planning. And with a tool, we should also try to establish a single source of truth. But I will come to that right in a second. So we need some sort of a visual collaboration tool, something like the PI planning app, where we have a tool that everyone instantly understands how to use because it's similar to a physical board. And yeah, we need to have a place where we have all the planning related content gathered in one place. So the value that we are delivering is in that specific tool. And I'm talking about stories, features, dependencies, objectives, risks, everything that you produce during a PI planning. And everything that you basically would put on a sticky note, and that you would hang up on a whiteboard if we were in a person in an in-person planning together in the same room. And all these things you need to have in one tool, and everyone can go to that specific tool. Optimally, it's integrated with an ALM tool. Like the PI planning app is, as I said, integrated with Jira, Rally, and Microsoft Azure DevOps. So if we create something in the PI planning app, it gets automatically created in Jira. If we change something in Jira, be it the summary, or we move it into a different iteration, it gets updated in the PI planning app in real time. So this way we have really this single source of truth. And yeah, we said before, we might want to extend our agenda to 3, 4, or even 5 days. You can't make sure that no one changes anything in Jira during the off times. So yeah, you already have a problem at hand if someone does just a small change and you don't have a single source of truth anymore. So someone will come back to their board the next day and say, I know I did something or some work in Jira yesterday, but I can't remember exactly what I changed. And yeah, then you have already 2 different tools with 2 different statuses. So it's really important that the visual collaboration tool is integrated well. And then make sure every team has a team area where they can concentrate and focus on the planning. And what do I mean with that? And why is it important, basically? So when we go into a breakout session as a team, there is already enough distraction on our board when people move things around. And if we can at the same time also see things being moved by other teams on the program board, then questions like, what was that story again we were talking about? These questions you will start to hear more. And this is the distraction that we want to keep low. So I can't add anything to that really, but from our point of view and how we also designed the PI planning app is you either go to the program board and you're focusing on the program board, or you go to the program risk board and you see the risk board. But if we see at the same time all of the information changing, some people will constantly forget what they were doing before. So yeah, don't underestimate that. And here I would like to add a story from a customer. It is US-based organization. So they said, well, we don't want to spend time and money on a new tool. So that was, I think, 1 year ago. We just use existing Google Docs, Excel spreadsheets, and everything in combination with PowerPoint. After PI planning, they came back and said, okay, people really struggled to connect the different tools. We want to go back to the simple solution that really helps us to be as close to face as possible. I don't know what exactly happened in their PI planning, but I can imagine it was not pretty. So be careful with what tools you select. That's the main point I would like to make here. Then video conferencing system. By now we can say for sure all organizations on this planet have a video conferencing system such as either Zoom, WebEx, or Microsoft Teams. But make sure you have breakout rooms enabled. Don't think at the day of PI planning, well, breakout rooms would be a nice thing. Really prepare it before PI planning and also inform the teams on how to use it. But we will come to that for also during the simulation part. And then something I learned from SAFE fellow Michael Stump is that term, at least, central point of access. So what he meant with that is that you have a dedicated space where you share all the links for the different sessions and breakout rooms and when they should attend or join these breakout rooms. So for draft plan review, you have a link for the breakout room, but you also have a link for descriptions around features. And this should help to have a central point where they can come if they don't know where they should be at the moment. And you can this way save, as RTs, at least save a lot of questions like, where do I need to go? Can you share the link to this or that? And we need to remember this costs a lot of time if we have to share those things over and over again, because we have 120, 150 people waiting. And yeah, that's something to consider to implement. And in the PI planning app, you could just create a canvas and add these links and build it out the way you want. And then we have access to tools. Make sure everyone has access to the tools. Everyone has a login. You don't want to take the approach that one person does all the input on the boards. Everybody should work together like you are used to on physical boards. And yeah, every defined collaboration channel needs to have its purpose and facilitator. You need to have someone to be responsible to maintain these channels, to check the technical stuff. And this brings me into the next point. I can't stress it enough, but test, and test again. We can't test enough. It's technology. Things can go sideways. Try to think when preparing your PI planning of the worst case scenarios, and yeah, try to make sure you have a plan B if something like that happens. And yeah, again, the biggest risk, or a big risk, is to introduce too many different tools, because then people get lost and they spend a lot of time or a lot of their time context switching between different user interfaces. So that's something you should avoid, I guess. So let's jump into the part simulation. So let me switch to the team simulation. And yeah, So the purpose of a simulation is mainly everyone is well prepared and has a good feeling that PI planning will be a smashing success. So to prepare a simulation, reserve 1 hour and invite as many people of your art that can attend the simulation. Make sure that at least the Scrum Masters can participate. And the simulation serves to enable the teams to deal with the different tools, the defined working agreements, the remote setting in general, and possibly the agenda. But yeah, the agenda does not have much priority in the simulation actually. But it's mainly that the teams can familiarize with the conditions of remote PI planning. And yeah, use a simulation provided by Scaled Agile like Alice or Geekbooks, where your teams don't have to think much about the product, but about the mechanics of the PI planning, how to work together. And to prepare the simulation, think also through the trickiest things, and I mean communication wise, that how you interact with each other and what problems you already see could turn into big problems, things like dependency handling, or as an example, visualizing risks, and really try to concentrate on these areas and tackle them in the simulation. Or as one of our customers from Australia said, you don't have time for these questions during PI planning, and that's really true. The simulation helps us to be trained for the stuff that we need to already know when we go into PI planning, because we want to have the conversations about the plan and not about the tooling or where we need to go. And yeah, this is a really cool approach that those guys in or this organization in Australia implemented. They ran a simulation just with the Scrum Masters. And in this simulation, they also developed their set of working agreements at the same time in the same simulation. And 1 week before the actual PI planning event, they ran a second simulation inviting as many people of the art. And this way, everyone was already familiar with how the working agreements work for them. And they were already able to change some stuff that they felt, okay, that was not optimal. And this way they could improve, and their PI planning afterwards went really, really well, although it was their first remote PI planning. But for all of that, you need time and you need to plan ahead. You can't just 1 week before your PI planning start with these things. It needs some time that people can familiarize with all these new information and also internalize how they need to navigate through that landscape. Yeah, and another great idea from a US customer was they did a they did a fist of 5 also after simulation. So not only after PI planning, they asked for the fist of 5, but they also did it for the simulation. And I really love that, because just ask the question, how confident are you that this next PI planning will be a success? And then you have a feeling if you have done a good job with your preparation or if you need to adjust some things. And another funny thing that we got as a feedback once was, after PI planning, we found out that one person didn't know that we were using a visual collaboration tool. And I can't really add anything to that, but that explains pretty well that they missed out on the opportunity of a proper simulation. Otherwise, this would have not happened. Yeah, And now I would like to switch to the PI planning event. So let me switch to the board PI planning event. Here we see already some stickies added to the board. Not much content yet, but here I see some questions that we can tackle afterwards. Yeah, so PI planning is really to remind us of that. The key takeaway of a PI planning should be that we are all aligned, all the teams are aligned on the art, and that we have a shared mission and vision. And yeah, during the PI planning event, we need to have a clear understanding how we work through dependencies, for example. And if you use a tool like the PI planning app, we can create a dependency sticky note. We can, on the dependency, write down what we need from another team. We can see which team created it. So that's the PI planning event team right now. And the arrow from left to right indicates on which team it depends on. So we can send it to another team and of course, be respectful of the working agreements that we defined. Make sure that you follow these guidelines, whether you communicate first through Slack with the Scrum Master group, or if you have an open video channel where you can ask anytime if you have a dependency, although that's not something I would recommend because it also, again, increases the distraction, especially during the breakout sessions. But yeah, it's also an approach that I have seen a lot. But yeah, what we can send this dependency to another team, and we can then switch to the other team here, and they receive the dependency in the same iteration. They can also, yeah, plan it out, break it down into user stories for themselves. And once they know they can deliver it, they can click on the program button and send it to the program board in order to visualize the dependency on the program board with the PI planning app team, for example, like we would on a physical wall with a string. And we can also, it automatically apply the flag so that we know, hey, that's an unresolved dependency yet, but now that it's resolved, we can also remove the flag. And this way, the RTE understands that's an agreed dependency between two teams. Yeah, something else that's really important, and that's that was reported to us by several customers. One in the US said, check technology every morning, never think everything will work fine. And this is really important. Don't assume that it works every day, and check it regularly if it's still going. And yeah, just as a reminder. Then during team breakout sessions, teams may also identify risks. We can place the risks in the risk area, select the risk sticky type. The specialty of the risk sticky type is that we can roam it right on our team board, or we can say, hey, that's a program risk. We need to bring it to the attention of the whole train. In that case, we can mirror it or send it to the program risk board. It disappears from our board, but it appears on the program risk board under risk submissions, and we can place it in the area we want and roam it here during program risk session of PI planning. So these are two examples on how to, on what you need or have a special eye on, because these are the workflows that need to be simple, because we are here to visualize dependencies. And then something else is utilize stickers. In the PI planning app, we have these stickers here. So if we have, for example, my super idea, then what we've learned from a customer is that they applied a color for each sticker set to a role. So they said red is for RTs, orange is for product management, yellow is for product owners, blue is for system architects. And if the teams had a question for the system architect, for example, they would just apply the blue question mark. And once the system architect has time to go from board to board, he could just filter for the question mark of his color, or for all the stickies with this specific sticker color, and directly see where the teams have questions, jump into a call with the Scrum Master right away and clarify those questions on the fly. And this can really save some time. Yeah, and then basically what we have, yeah, here we go. And something else that I also like a lot is this German company that created a management question sticky note with a bright color, where teams could write down questions they had for management during the breakout sessions regarding strategic decisions or yeah, things like that. And the management could filter the board for this specific sticky type also from the search, and then directly jump into answering those questions or preparing proper Q&As. Yeah, these are the things I wanted to share with you. We definitely have some time left to go through questions that I see here on the board. Just as a last sentence, have fun with your remote PI planning. Be creative with the new situation and adapt to it. If you need support with it, Digital Tango are experts in this field as well. We just learn from our customers using our solution, but they can definitely help you with training and consulting in these areas. So if you have anything that you, or any challenges in that regard, make sure to reach out to them. But you can also reach out to me and I will connect you with them. But you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect with you. If you want to start using or testing out the PI planning app, I can also throw a sticky note up here with the link where you can start into a, I can also put it on into the chat here if you're interested to sign up for a trial, and you can reach out to me and I help you with configuration if you're interested in that.